Well, hello and welcome everyone to the IMA Weekly Show. I'm Dr. Ryan Cole, Head of Medical and Scientific Affairs at the Independent Medical Alliance. Tonight we're talking about a group of patients who are too often ignored in the public conversation, detransitioners. These are individuals who are told that changing their gender medically or surgically would resolve deep distress, only to later find themselves facing a new set of physical, emotional, and legal challenges, often without acknowledgement and too often without adequate care. This is a difficult subject. It's also an important one because whatever people's politics may be, patients deserve one thing, and that is honesty. They deserve informed consent, and they deserve long-term follow-up, as well as compassionate care when medical interventions do not lead where they are promised. So tonight we're going to take a look at what detransitioners are experiencing, why so many have been overlooked, and what a more responsible, humane, and patient-centered response should look like. I'm joined by an excellent panel tonight. First, we have Dr. Katherine Welch, who is an IMA Senior Fellow in Pediatrics and has been a strong voice for protecting children and restoring medical ethics in this conversation. She's an advisor and on the healthcare team for the Resilience Health Network, where she assists those who have undergone masculinizing or feminizing medical interventions to achieve the best health outcomes possible, whatever they may be. Jennifer Lahl is a pediatric critical care nurse and founder of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. She's spent years documenting the stories of detransitioners and raising awareness about the long-term consequences many are now facing. And Forrest Smith joins us as a detransitioner who can speak directly to the lived reality behind these debates, what it means to go through this, and what support is still missing. So thank you all for being here. I want to start this at the human level before we get into the policy and medicine. You know, when people hear the word detransitioner, they may think of a political category, but these are real patients, often young patients, who are dealing with consequences that can be lifelong. So let's begin there. Who are these patients? What are they going through? Why has the medical system seemed so reluctant to fully see them? I'll start with you, Dr. Welch. From a pediatric perspective, what concerns you most about the way that children and adolescents have been brought into this medical pathway, often with very limited long-term evidence?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here on another webinar and with our other guests tonight. I really appreciate IMA for addressing this topic. It's very, very important. And I mean, the thing about detransition is, it's not even a thing. It's not recognized. It's like you type in a Word document, it doesn't recognize the words, not the dictionary, it's not in medical code, not anything. And so I think IMA is not, is addressing other people who are unknown. And so this is another category. But from a pediatric perspective, I think, the problem is that puberty is not a medical diagnosis. It's not a pathology. And unfortunately, gender dysphoria, is so broad and loosely defined is to capture too many people that are just uncomfortable with their bodies. And in this age of everyone online and digital and, and having avatars and things like that. And it's like our bodies are uncomfortable and we don't like it and we're struggling because of emotions and bodies and changing and commodification and idealizing and all these things. And so a lot of it really has to do with gender dysphoria is kind of like puberty, and we're being told that, well, you can just pause. We're not really sure. It's informed consent does not exist, because there's no way. I mean, it's impossible for young people to consent to some of these things, and they're being lied to. And it's also, as been demonstrated by other studies, is that it is a social contagion phenomenon. And so, just briefly, we could spend the whole rest of the webinar on that, but I mean, it's not a thing.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah.
gender dysphoria. We're uncomfortable, with how we are, but trans is not a thing. So
Well, and that, that kind of brings up the question. So much of what relates to this is anxiety, depression, autism spectrum traits, social isolation. Yet, the intervention in our modern era becomes, for some reason, a dominant response or the answer to everything. Oh, something's up, we've got to intervene. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
let's just over medicalization, over procedures and medicines and medicalization. uh, People will say, like, well, there's follow the money, and there's definitely a lot of money to be made on these procedures, and yet for detransitioners, they're not to be seen, and they're not followed up. And so there is certainly a lot of money, but there's also, basically, it's robbing, it's societal robbing of its children,
Well, and I like that
and
you bring
and
that
child
up.
abuse and maltreatment, basically.
I like that you bring that up. It's, there's a lot of money, but it ignores the humanity,
Hmm.
the money over humanity. So Jennifer, you've spent years listening to stories from detransitioners and helping them document those stories. What patterns have emerged that the broader public still doesn't understand?
I when I think about what doesn't the public understand, it's hard for me to think in the terms of the public because I've been steeped in this for so long. So of course, I just assume everybody knows what I'm thinking and worrying about and talking about. Um, and as an aside, as a pediatric critical care nurse for many, many years, I just want to remind people that, when we used to see young patients with anorexia that were really, really frail because they were on the point of starvation, so we would see them in the hospital, we would not affirm them. We would recognize that they are in distress, and we would offer them, the care that they needed to protect them and to get them on a path toward health. I remember one particular young girl in a large children's hospital where I was working with severe anorexia, and we had to have the engineers from the hospital come up and literally turn off all the water in her room and her toilet and her sink because she would use water to drink and vomit and flush things on the toilet. And we didn't put a mirror in her room and say, yes, you are fat, you are disgustingly fat. And so here we have this example where children are told through social media, through algorithms, that they're born in the wrong body. That's one of the big themes. They're born in the wrong body, and that this means that they are the opposite sex and they need to medicalize and change their sex so they can feel good again in their body. This notion of what's called ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, which came about in like the 2010s, kind of when social media and smartphones got into all the hands of adolescents, and algorithms were slick and savvy. And if you looked on something that was trans related, you were instantly fed all this. And the large number of comorbidities that these youth have, these young people have. I don't think the larger public realizes that there's so much going on in these young people's lives that allow them to sort of entertain this notion that they're born in the wrong body. And so we're not looking at that. We saw an explosion of this during the COVID lockdowns. Children or young youth were instantly at home, they were locked down, they were on their smartphones, they were on their computers. One gentleman I interviewed for one of the films I made, he literally had to turn off the internet in his home at night. Otherwise, their young son was spending his whole entire night not sleeping, but online chatting and in, all these chat rooms. So I don't think the public really realizes that the trauma, the role that autism plays, these children that are autistic, it's black and white. Oh, I'm born in the wrong body. That must mean I'm the opposite sex. And the role of pornography. I mean, along with social media and all the, the TikTok and anime and cosplay is also the rapid rise. I mean, children are getting access to pornography. Chloe Cole, who's a very famous detransitioner in my state, California, I remember speaking to her. She's also in California, and she goes, I saw pornography that no 9-year-old should ever see, that no adult should ever see. And so, how can we affirm that, yes, you're born in the wrong body and ignore the glaring um, trauma and burden that these children, I say children because I'm old. When I say children, I'm thinking of 18-year-olds. 25-year-olds are children to me too. So I think we've done in medicine in particular, we've done a huge disservice to these young people.
Yeah. I mean, it's so many factors, obviously, and a new era with technology. Forrest, you're the human side of this. Take us back to the beginning. How old were you when you started down the path, and what were you told about what transitioning would, do for you? What did you hope your life would look like um, on the other side of transitioning?
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan, and Catherine and Jennifer. I should say Jennifer brought up the ROGD. And so I'm not part of that cohort of ROGD and ROGD, my understanding of it is also specifically more with the female cohort. So for me, I see myself as being a little bit more in line with what the traditional cohorts of people who seek out transition are. I went down the medical path at 20
Okay.
to answer that specific question, but there were some deep-seated psychosexual issues that I was trying to resolve
Mm-hmm.
through specifically hormone therapy. So the answer of what did I think I was going to get out of it? I thought that hormone replacement therapy would resolve some of those psychosexual issues that had been setting into place since the onset of puberty. Pornography did play a role. Cross-dressing was part of that. It was a very intense experience. Um, in terms of language, do I mind using the term gender dysphoria to describe what I experienced? That's a whole other discussion, right?
Sure.
But the question of what did I think was going to be on the other side? Well, I wasn't really thinking about that. I
Right.
was 20 years old. It was very emotional. As I said, puberty, there was a lot of sex hormones and lust and desire and all of those sexual issues are wrapped up in it. There was not a lot of long-term thinking. It was very short term. I knew what I wanted, and it was what I had seen online when in 2015, that's when I began my transition. There was actually this wave of two things combining changes in the W path, changes in the DSM-5 that opened it up, and also social media was really kicking off. And so in 2015, I started to see on YouTube men who looked like me. They looked like they were in college, drinking a lot, kind of trying to cover up their depression with alcohol and partying. And they would take feminizing hormones, and then I would watch their transitions, these kind of picture a day transition videos, and they would slowly feminize. And it appeared as though they were becoming more peaceful and serene. And so I wanted that for myself. But ultimately, when I look back on that, it was rather superficial. It was superficial as you could expect from a young mind.
Absolutely. And kind of in follow-up to that, so for, many people may be hearing this for the first time from a detransitioner's perspective, what do you want them to understand or know about how someone gets to that point and then what it feels like to come out the other side?
I would say about getting to that point that it's different for everybody.
Sure.
The term autogynephilia gets used a lot for talking
Hmm.
about the men. I'll use that term and I'll discuss it. But even when people use that, it's like they feel like they've gone, aha, and they see the one thing underlying it. But the truth is, if you actually look at the work Blanchard did, he was even it was also an umbrella category for more of these subcategories of different
Right.
qualities. And you talk about autism. I think that's always been part of this issue with men. But there's still other kind of types that are drawn to this. So I would say it's different for everybody.
Well, and I
Um,
like that you bring that up because it's not any one individual, it's individual. It's not any one broad thing for everybody. I mean, that's such an important thing for people to understand. And why, as parents or as people in the community, as friends, as colleagues, et cetera, just recognizing the unique needs of each individual.
and coming out the other side of it, you know, obviously there's grief and loss, and
Sure.
but broadly speaking, I would say there was a great relief to finally see what was underneath that experience. I'm going to use the word autogynephilia again. I think of it almost as a rash. When somebody comes in with a rash, you don't know what exactly is causing that rash. You can see the rash, that's a symptom of something else. Coming out on the other side of it was actually because thankfully I have a family that is functional enough that they can take me back, right? And I can come back into my family and look at the problems with my parents and also look at myself and my family unit within a broader family within the context of cousins and grandparents. And doing that actually was for me, I was able to trace a lot of my own issues back into my parents and my family, and I was able to see an intergenerational issue as well as my own personal issue. And that was a wonderful experience, as much as it was a reckoning,
Sure.
right? But also when you have that and you see clearly for the first time enough that you can kind of move ahead and avoid that negative experience and learn your lesson, that's also a very great experience to have.
Well, I love that analogy. It's a rash and it was itching, and then now you were able to cure the rash.
Yes. Yeah.
Great medical analogy. So, from the medical reality point of view, a lot of the public language around the issue stays at the level of either identity, affirmation, but medicine also has consequences. There's, acts of omission, things we leave out, or things that doctors do commit. And, hormones have consequences, surgeries have consequences. And, those consequences don't disappear when someone changes course. So, Dr. Welsh, back to you. What are some of the physical and developmental risks involved when minors are placed on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or receive surgery?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. There's
I'm
I mean,
sure.
anywhere. I mean, if you think like your pubertal development, your sex hormones, pretty much every cell in your body is marked with those X and XY chromosomes, and there's different interactions. It's not just about sexual reproductive development, but actually we can talk about that because what 14-year-old can consent to not having orgasms or children or something like that, right? I mean, there's no concept about family. But then even bone development and strength, especially in women, when you're talking about the social and emotional development, it's just pause. Like you need these hormones and that pubertal development to develop executive functioning and things like that. So even when they say it's pause, most of these kids are going through transition because that's the path that they're on. But when we get on the other side of it, and Forrest can tell you, there's very, very permanent, very serious and like lifelong consequences. Whether you have the women not being able to breastfeed because they've had mastectomy, or what they call top surgery, nice euphemism there. Or not really being, or how the disfigurement,
Mhm.
the irreversible surgeries, or the irreversible effects of testosterone on a woman's voice, or the effects of estrogen on a man. And we could go on and on about that, but the problem is that there's no informed consent. There's no predict. I mean, you can predict, but this is all experimental to begin with. And
Mhm.
the problem is on the other side is that now you have thousands and thousands of detransitioners needing medical care. They're not going to go back to the people who mutilated them. I mean, they're furious, they're angry, they don't trust them. the detransitioners coming into our care, they said, we don't want to go to any gender affirming physician. I mean, even if they're good, even if they're considered the best, like, no, if you are lying and doing this to other people, I don't want to see you again. I don't want to see anyone. And they're not following up with those people. And so our network, the Resilience Health Network, will, is a network of clinicians who are doing medical care for where we're trying to provide medical care or provide medical homes or look for medical homes for the detransitioners. The problem is it was wild west medicine to begin with. It was already experimental, and now we have detransitioners seeking medical care to undo what was experimental. So it's further experimental to say, what are the long-term consequences? What are these consequences of having testosterone as a teenager woman? So, and then doctors don't want to do that because the good ones are like, well, we don't know what we're doing, and we're uncomfortable, and where's the study, or where's the guidelines? And there aren't any, and the guidelines for transition were made up and false, and so
Right.
there are none for the detrans. And
Well,
so
and
we
I
can
like,
get into the specifics of the but undoing it, so that's we're still working on that, and that's part of what the Resilience Health Network is also doing. We're bringing in people who, surgeons and endocrinologists, and people who have been working in this field and who can lend some credence and who are able to support other clinicians who want to help detransitioners.
well, and I like that Forrest brought up, and you just brought up the same point. It's, you go back to W path, and that's a whole different topic, but they put forward some quote standards, quote guidelines, but they were mostly made up in pseudoscience and no long-term follow-up studies, and it was a very biased organization. Who was it? Schellenberger that did the deep dive into W
Yeah, that's
path.
right. Michael
Yeah.
Schellenberger, the W
Yeah,
path files.
yeah.
And
So
Mia Hughes was the one who took the lead on that.
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, that again, if you want to do a deep rabbit hole dive on that, that's a fascinating story in and of itself. And I'm glad that Forrest brought that up. Jennifer, from your point of view, what are the medical trends you see? What tends to emerge for these young individuals who are detransitioning that the system isn't prepared to handle? I mean, what? Yeah, Dr. Welch just pointed out very well that they're not going to go back to the provider. So what do you see from the medical need point of view in terms of, where can they go or where can they turn?
Yeah. Well, I kind of entered the trans area of medical practice in a roundabout way. I've been spending probably the last 15 years of my professional work in the area of assisted reproductive technologies, fertility and infertility issues. And as a pediatric nurse, I became aware that when they block puberty, and or they put people on cross-sex hormones to put them on a path, that they're offering these youth fertility preservation. And that's when I said, that's it. That's it. So I cajoled two of my colleagues, Dr. Michael Lahl, an endocrinologist, and Angie Thompson, an OBGYN doctor, to co-author a paper with me that ended up in Frontiers in Medicine in the Endocrinology Journal on fertility preservation as a model for dysphoric youth. Even Hilary Cass, Dr. Cass, in her Cass report, recommended that all fertility preservation should be offered to these young people. And it should be standardized how it's offered, because a lot of this care isn't standardized. It's just kind of willy-nilly. And I sort of blew a gasket on the inside and said that, so I ended up at the FTC speaking on a panel there, because the FTC is going after trans medicine in the United States for fraud and abuse. And I think that's the biggest concern that I have, that I hear from young people who have taken cross-sex hormones for many, many years, or just even a few years. Will I be able to get pregnant?
Hmm.
And a lot of them regret that they didn't bank and freeze their ovarian testicular tissue and or their eggs or their sperm. And I tell them that that's a fool's errand anyway. The chances of you getting pregnant from freezing and banking your reproductive tissue and freezing it for maybe 15, 20 years by the time you're old enough to even consider wanting to have children, that you're being offered something which, really rubs me the wrong way as far as informed consent, because a patient should be able to trust if their doctor's offering them something that it's being offered because it's good and helpful and beneficial. not just more of a money grab or false hope. So that's, for me is very hard. Katherine, Dr. Welch mentioned voice changes. A couple of women have recently come forward. They love to sing. They used to sing. Now they can't sing anymore. That sounds like a minor thing to lose in your life when you could lose other things maybe other people would see more seriously. But when it's really meaningful and important to you, that's a part of you that it's been taken from you. It's not that you've lost it, it's really been taken from you from disingenuous practices. The whole lie of all of this is trying to make it so you can pass. You can pass as the opposite sex. And even though you've had all these surgeries, you can't defeminize or demasculinize a lot of these things that have been done to your body. The way they do a mastectomy on a gender dysphoric woman is not the same as a breast cancer patient. I mean, there's shaving of the bone, there's contouring, there's repositioning of the nipples, and they talk about nerve damage. They lose sensation. I mean, our breasts are part of our sexual bodies, and you have no sensation. Prisha Mosley talks about, she recently gave birth as a woman who's had a mastectomy during her trans phase. She has blocked ducts and a lot of pain because milk is being produced in small amounts, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. And so these are real issues that these people face, and I just think it's so sad that at the hands of medicine that this has been done.
Thank you. Yeah, I have so many different areas that we could go, but Forrest, let's go back to you. From your own experience, what did detransitioning mean for you medically, and what kind of challenges did you face that people obviously don't have this lived experience and may not appreciate? What did it medically look like for you, and how were you able to find a professional to help you detransition?
I would say that I'm fairly lucky in that I had a bilateral orchiectomy, but I did not have a penectomy or a vaginoplasty or a vulvoplasty, in which case my situation would be a lot worse, and I don't know if I would be where I'm at today. Now, what Jennifer brought up is the fertility. That's actually, for me, that's the biggest regret that I live with. Besides having my testicles removed alone, I don't want to make light of the trauma. Just the mere absence is actually a really horrifying. Is it a medical issue or a psychological issue? I don't really know. I live with a constant. It's about a 1 or 2 level of pain in the nerves, and it's constantly there. That's something that throughout the day, if I'm working, I can often put that behind me. It's made my sleep a lot worse. Ironically, I kind of, when I was in my transgender identity, my sleep got better because I learned how to meditate and I started doing some more kind of self-care things. But afterwards, with the additional trauma of the amputation of my testicles, I struggle a lot more with insomnia now. Um, I've been on testosterone replacement therapy since January of 2021. And Catherine's my doctor, so she has actually seen me come in with low testosterone and not realize that my testosterone level sank. And it's something you don't always notice right away, I think, because the nature of it. Hormones are very powerful on the one hand, but they're very subtle. Now, recently, this just happened recently, and I upped my dose, and I feel great. I did notice the difference. But I haven't lived with the absence of testosterone since the surgery. And that experience was harrowing, to have a castration level low testosterone. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, I can
It's
only imagine.
abysmal.
I
It's
can
it's an
only,
abysmal experience. Just the level of brain fog that I had. And also it changes you so fundamentally. The hormonal change is so fundamental that I remember I'm afraid I'm slipping into psychological terrain here, but as I began to to retransition with testosterone, it was jarring to think about, who am I really? Like, what is my personality if my personality can be changed? And I think that those are very deep philosophical questions. And there have been times where I've even wondered, about if there's ever going to be a day where I'm forced to quit or I do quit. And I hope that if that ever happened, I would be able to kind of um, uh, to hold on to myself despite that.
Hmm.
But the hormonal issue, I now live with, it's been called a medical leash, right? It's something that I have to factor into every life choice.
Sure. Well, and you bring up such a good point. I mean, just for the general audience, and that's that we are hormonal beings. And so for general health, I mean, when mood shifts and body cycle shift and whatnot, that's an important point for everybody. It's like, hey, what are your hormones doing? And I'm glad that you delved into the psychological aspect of it, because that's the human aspect of what you've gone through and so many others that are trying to detransition are going through. There's that grief, the confusion, isolation, betrayal, maybe shame, but it's not simply changing the mind. It's a reckoning, as you've pointed out. And what does that psychological side feel like in the long term? And obviously you've got a good doctor and you have some resilience that's admirable amongst anybody going through any medical situation, but especially what you've gone through. So, how do you psychologically rebuild that trust in yourself? What happened, or what gave you that sense of rebuilding trust?
Well, I had 2 years of therapy, and that was helpful.
Hmm.
But that was almost the last tier
Sure.
of the family reunion, and faith.
Hmm.
I can't really separate any three of those. But faith was a big factor. So, um, I mean, when I was really stepping into, I called it an era of grace that I had. I felt like I didn't really take credit for my detransition. I really believed that I had been lifted out of it by the Lord.
Beautiful.
But having family there, and as I mentioned earlier, I was looking for me as a man who went through this. I was looking at some intergenerational issues with masculinity that,
Sure.
it's very much between me and my father and his father,
Hmm.
right? Now, that's not the only man and father figure in my life. In fact, I have three uncles. I have, my dad didn't come with a lot of family, but my mom did. So I remember one day being out on the farm and just looking, I was riding to the orchard with my grandparents, and I was just looking at the back of their heads, and I was looking at my grandfather. So I'm talking about my mother's father. And I just had this very simple kind of childish thought of I came from him. And
Hmm.
just seeing that, like, I'm not just my father's son, I'm my mother's father's grandson, right? So this whole intricate web of relation was really huge. So when I did detransition, I felt like I was stepping back into the world as a son, as a brother, as a nephew, right? As a cousin, as all of these other kind of even the most basic, simple masculine roles of family. I rebuilt myself through that understanding of myself in relation to family, and also work. I went to work, and a lot of the like one of the most superficial things that you don't think of, but a very real thing is when like your wardrobe,
Hmm.
like every think about how many different uh, articles of clothing you have in your wardrobe and you need to function. And so when you've transitioned and made your whole wardrobe that of the opposite sex, that's like this funny level of identity, but it becomes a real barrier.
I
And so
bet.
when I did step back into the world as a man, part of how I ended up rebuilding my wardrobe and my identity was going to work. I went to work in a cannery. It was the cannery where my parents had met, where my family had driven loads of berries. So everything was centered around family, including work. I embraced labor, and then I rebuilt my wardrobe and my identity through work as a man. And at the same time, I did find a psychologist who is simply a forensic psychologist, which was he wasn't a gender specialist. He was a forensic psychologist with a specialty in male sexual offenders. So
Hmm.
I found somebody who basically had seen it all, and I could just be completely honest with,
Sure.
I'm not a serial killer or a dangerous predator. So I could go in there, and he would simply ask me questions, including he asked me three questions. I asked him for some goals, and he asked me three questions. He said, "Who is Forrest?" what is stability, what is a healthy relationship? Because those are the three things that I came in there talking about the most, was being stable and financially independent. Um, he reflected back on me, who are you, really? It was
Hmm.
Forrest. And a healthy relationship. So, I mentioned faith, family, and then that other aspect, therapy was a part of it, but I also journaled by hand, and it was just self, right? It was therapy, and asking those very specific questions to just reflect on, insightfully, of who am I? Because when you go through a transition, you try to change your sex and you adopt an identity of somebody you are not, and of somebody who is the opposite sex, that is, a very destabilizing experience.
Certainly.
So there's of course there's a big psychological aspect that to the detransition, that you could say there's a psychological detransition as well. I had to work through a lot of the ideology, and I had to work through a lot of there's a lot of kind of other ideologies that often go with transgender ideology. I think I had to go through all of the whole LGBT list of kind of categories to get down to just who am I?
Sure.
Not any of those identities. Who am I? On like, who am I really? What do I like? And all those little questions. It took me a few years. It took me 3 years, 2 to 3 years with that therapist.
Yeah, and those, I mean, those are great questions for anybody to ask themselves. Who am I? What are my relationships? And I love the journaling aspect as well that you brought in, because that's really a good way to just tease thought out and just to I think focus one's directions and thoughts. I mean, yeah, it sounds like a great psychologist and really did some great work for you. So Jennifer, you've heard many of these themes as you've been working in the space. The regret, anger, loss, relief, or a mix of all of it. And, you know, Forrest sounds like he has a great support network. I mean, what do you see out there in terms of those who don't have that support network, or how do they find resources?
Yeah, I mean, that is a big problem because on one hand, when they embrace this trans identity, they're sort of, they'll talk about how they're thrown a glitter party and they're welcomed in by a new family that will take them in if they're in a situation where their parents are not affirming of this. And so they have this whole new community, this whole new group of friends that just love bomb them. And then when they wake up and discover one day that they've made a mistake and they don't want to be part of that, they're shunned, they're excommunicated. This whole support, you know, um, group is just taken away from them. And unfortunately, when you're a family, such as the case with many of these people like Forrest, this is stress on the whole entire family. I mean, it rips apart husbands and wives. It rips apart, children that get ignored. It's kind of like having a chronically ill child in the home, and all the other healthy children sort of get ignored because this one child sort of becomes the center of the family, and all the harm that happens in just those familial relationships are real, um, and sometimes tragic. I mean, I'm working with a woman right now who has had no contact with her son for 5 years. She doesn't even know if he's alive. She doesn't even know where he lives. And that those are the kind of realities. So, but on the other hand, the good news is when the person does decide to detransition, in the case of the family is, the prodigal son, ready to welcome that son back and have the feast and the party and be thrilled to death. That's wonderful. But there are so many support groups now that this has been around. There's parent support groups forever, all around the world. Canada, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, there's parent groups are focused only on parents of boys. Like in Forrest's case, parents of boys that have fallen down this rabbit hole. There's plenty of support group for the detransitioners and the camaraderie. We just had Detransition Awareness Day in Washington, D.C. There's another big conference coming up in Denver in a few weeks that's focused on detransitioner. So there's these friendships that form around the country because they know that they're going to be hated. They're going to be, you're a grifter. Well, you never really were trans anyway. You're just doing this so that you can make money. But they do have plenty of healthy, healthy relationships and groups to turn to. And also through the Resilience Health Network, hopefully more and more physicians who are trained and feel competent in meeting their medical needs. Because as Katherine said earlier, there's a lot of distrust.
Well, and you bring up such a good point, and that's just the humanity of all of this. We all just seek community and belonging. And so having a community available, resources to fall back on, people to support in whatever stage one is. What does this ethically look like to you, Dr. Welch, in terms of professional psychological support for someone before they make a difficult medical decision that may put them into, an irreversible point? And then what does it look like on the flip side in terms of the psychological support? Obviously, Forrest, you've had a great psychologist, but what does it look like from your medical point of view, Dr. Welch?
Well, it's a problem because we want to say go seek professional help, see a counselor. Unfortunately, a lot of the counselors that you might take your kid to are going to be affirming, and because they've grown up in this school and they've been brought up in that trans is real, and that they're going to, so you have to be extra careful and make absolute sure that the therapist that take your kid to. But I see kids in my practice as a pediatrician, and they're going through distress, and they think they're trans or they're non-binary or something, and it's a destabilizing time. But the thing that Forrest's story highlights is that the whole transition lie is inherently destabilization, and they want to keep you there, because if you're unstable, you will continue to seek that glitter family, that medication, that the solution is always there because you're always unstable, you're always looking for something, and they've usually left their family, right? And so,
Mhm.
but part of Forrest healing has been to find that stabilization, that groundedness, that who I am and where I come from and things like that. um what it looks like, it kind of depends. Forrest can speak more to like what he would have needed. His experience is different than someone who has we mentioned autogonophilia, we mentioned ROGD, we mentioned girls, boys, earlier, later, things like that. It's all going to look a little bit different, but really it's having that stable family.
Mhm.
And if you, and I have met, people will tell me things about their daughters or their sons, and and trust me with that information, but they are not lying to their child. As difficult as it is, as estranged that relationship may be, and being silent, like Jennifer mentioned, not talking for 5 years, when and if they come around, they will come back to the people who never lied. They will come back to the people who have stood firm and did not affirm them, because those people will all be like, you lied to me. So it's very, very painful. So I don't know if Forrest wants to continue to talk about like his particular, since we have him,
Mhm.
what would have spoken to him to help him through that situation, because you can't possibly, talk about, but we do need to have therapists that don't affirm. That's for sure.
Well, and I guess, I am going to bounce it to Forrest then with that kind of line of questioning and throw in the construct. And uh, in your opinion, were you ever truly given informed consent when you were going through the process, Forrest?
No, and I can tell you why with a really easy example. Right at the beginning, when I was beginning with the hormones, it shows up on the medical record in like two different providers, the endocrinologist and the counselors I was seeing. I repeatedly told them that I was afraid of losing my fertility.
Hmm.
I said verbatim that I was afraid that if I wasn't able to have to raise biological children, that I would never be happy. That was recorded verbatim by a
Mm.
counselor. So what I needed to have happen was I needed somebody to tell me, if you are concerned about losing your fertility, stop these hormones
Hmm.
right now. I just needed somebody to say that to me. It was that simple. And then from there, As I already confessed that there is a sexual component to it. There is some compulsion. There was a lot of intensity, but I showed up because I didn't want to live like that, and I wanted to work through it. It was an unwanted desire. I wanted to work through it somehow, but I had really given up on myself. That's a whole other issue with therapy. And I don't exactly know what a therapeutic model would have looked like, but what I do know is that I came in saying that I was afraid of losing my fertility. And what I got was a deconstructionist model. I got a counselor who asked me if a adoptive parent was any less valid than biological parents, and I heard those kind of sentiments from the people around me in the LGBT community that it was selfish for me to want my own children. And so when I look back on the drama of the first year of my transition, I was repeatedly telling people that I was afraid of losing my fertility, and I was being just like bullied.
Mm. And I mean, that's such an example of the medical system now and across the board in so many areas now is the doctor not respecting or not even listening to the patient to start with, let alone respecting the wishes of the patient or even hearing the patient. And, thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important aspect of where ideology has taken over science. I jokingly call it psydiology at this point because they ignore, what your need actually is or what your request is, and then they put you down a path that, fills an ideology rather than what you as an individual needed. And that's, I mean, here at IMA, that's one of our pillars is informed consent, and then focusing on you as the individual. Dr. Welch or Jennifer, do you want to comment on the whole informed consent process as well? Because obviously there's, a push for the affirmation side, but what in the detransition side, what does informed consent look like as well?
Uh, well, the informed consent is that we don't know,
Hmm.
and there's no promises. And we do know, Forrest, for Forrest, the informed consent is not a lie. He's going to need testosterone injections for the rest of his life, right? But as far as like reversibility and fortunately medical science is good. There's technology that's growing to help. We're in contact with some voice ENTs about changing voices and things like that. But as far as like informed consent just means being honest about, we will try hard, we're searching, we will do our best. Unfortunately the informed consent was on the and then transition was non-existent because they honestly could not say the things that they were being told. So,
Right.
Yeah. I think for me, and this is sort of a little window into how I think about things in an uncharitable way. Informed consent needs to be, we have no business doing this. This is not proper medical care. Doctors are not supposed to be damaging healthy, normal bodies. This is all experimental anyway. And we have no idea if you're ever going to be able to have children, have an orgasm, have a healthy sexual life. If you're going to be a woman that's going to have, lose your hair and be a bald woman the rest of your life with a deep voice, no matter what happens. I mean, it's got to just be the bare facts. But it gets me back to medicine has no business doing this at
Yes.
all.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say this is what informed consent should look like because there's no way you can dress it up. It's still going to be lipstick on a pig. It's not going to be informed consent. And in the case of minors, it's parents that are being asked to consent and they're being told that lie that maybe listeners have heard. Do you want a dead daughter or a live son? Because if you don't affirm this child, they're going to kill themselves. And, so that's manipulated, coercive sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the other thing too, going to the younger age at which a lot of this is happening with the parents, jumping on the social contagion or the mind virus aspect of this is realizing that puberty is a normal process of life. I think we all can look back on seventh, eighth, and ninth grade and not think of it too fondly, generally, as our hormones are changing. But also the fact that our frontal lobes don't fully develop until into our 20s, And so just making life-changing decisions when, we're a slow developing mammal compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, but just realizing that so many of those decisions are made too quickly without allowing our hormones, our body, our mind just to settle together. Okay, I want to jump to another point because there was an important ruling out of Colorado this week from the United States Supreme Court in terms of therapists who want to be able to help people in certain areas and being shut down by the system or delicensed for actually being different than other therapists. And so there's a lot of legal ramifications and legal questions that come up now with the whole transition detransition issue. Malpractice, informed consent, standards of care, documentation. Obviously, Forrest was able to go back and look at those records and say, look, they documented what his concerns were. And then the institutional responsibility. Dr. Welch brought up how much money is involved in this entire industry and to the detriment of the individual patient. So, do you think, for all three of you, I'll start with you, Forrest, do you think the legal system's catching up to what you went through?
I do because we saw what happened with Fox variant, and I was at Detrans Awareness Day, um, uh, last month, and they had a legal panel, and they were hot on the trails. They were talking about the issues that I faced in my lawsuit because I actually did have a lawsuit. That's why I have all my records. And my lawsuit failed. I didn't have a chance. I was too early in the game. I was in Multnomah County, which was deemed too hostile of a venue. And I was also told that my case wasn't sympathetic enough. One of the things that I heard is people thought that it would be somebody, a female who transitioned as a minor, was the opinion of that would be the landmark case. And they were right. They were right. That was. Because in a way, we kind of look at that and go, that's the most egregious because I think when we look at, the ROGD cohort, we are looking at a case where we go, what were the doctors thinking doing this to this girl who adopted a trans identity overnight? But in my case, there was a long brewing issue. There was a lot of agency. There were these other factors that made my case unappealing to lawyers that were out there looking for a case like this, and they were few and far between. And the legal institutions were also very captured by this ideology. In fact, the place where I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria was run out of a law school. So the legal institutions are very captured by transgender ideology. There was a lot of discrimination against my case. When I called around looking for lawyers, some of the things that paralegals said to me were just downright cruel. So it was very hard finding anybody to represent me, and I didn't find a very good lawyer. But I did manage to get, just through kind of the community of people that are coming around this. I had like a friend who was a paralegal from the gender critical community. And so I was able to familiarize myself with the legal territory, like the tort claims that protect a lot of hospitals. And I managed to get through a lot of those hurdles with my case, which didn't end up going to court. But I did see all of the legal hurdles and the technicalities that people who aren't lawyers or who haven't had legal experiences don't necessarily know about. Um, and that's why I say I think we're catching up. Because when I was at D-Trans Awareness Day, there was a legal panel and they were saying we're working on getting federal tort reform for detransitioners, extending the statute of limitations to allow detransitioners to go back and sue the providers that did this to them. So
That's
I've seen
good news.
a
Yeah,
lot
good
of
news.
people that are hot on the trails of this issue. So I think we'll catch up.
What do you think, Dr. Welch? The legal ramifications, what are you seeing?
Hope so. Yeah, I mean,
How about
yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's gonna, if the money is what's gonna take, doctors won't do something if it's a liability hotcake. I mean, look
Mhm.
at, some of the vaccine issues. There's no liability, so right, and right now you end up being able to get away without liability because people aren't willing to take these cases. It's ideologically unpopular among, a certain class, the elite class, the lawyer class, the educated class, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But yeah, so now with the case with Foxvarian, the dam has broken. We've been spiked, so there's more in the pipeline. There's several more on the way, and hopefully we'll see this. And as things get less popular, and with this administration ruling about CMS not covering for the transition when there's not as much money in that, because they care less about the patient and they do about their money and their revenue and not wanting to get sued, things like that. So
Right.
unfortunately, it's not because they care, it's because they don't want to get sued, and I hate that, but we'll take what we can get for now.
Sure. Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, if you look historically, there have been, the whole Tuskegee studies, there was all kinds of reparations that were paid to the victims of that. The same with, the forced sterilization programs. I mean, in California, my state, I think in the early 2000s was the last woman that was voluntarily sterilized. Gavin Newsom has set up a reparations fund because, lawsuit and people don't want to get in trouble. Biden sort of set this all in motion with his policies, his executive order. Trump comes into the White House day one. He starts issuing executive orders, getting men out of women's sports, men out of women's prisons, cracking down on pediatric gender surgeries. He gutted the language of all federal documents to say sex, not gender. He was very clear on that. And his record right now is kind of mixed on whether he's going to have success, but executive orders can be undone, which is why everybody's quickly trying to work on laws. But I like the model that the state of Florida did. And the state of Florida said, medical societies, get your act together. And the medical societies in Florida said, we're not doing this. Because we're doctors and this is not what doctors do.
Yes.
Instead of making it political and an act of the legislation that has to tell people how to practice medicine. So in my perfect world, the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatricians, the Endocrine Society, the plastic surgeons, is just say, we're not doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point.
So,
Good point.
yeah. And then, about the Supreme, just one comment about the Supreme Court case about the freedom of speech for therapists to actually, it's not conversion therapy, to get help to not be gay or trans or something like that. What that they just decided, and the one dissenting justice doesn't know what a woman is. So anyway,
Good point. Good point.
What did they expect from that dissenting justice?
Good
That doesn't know what a woman is. So what do you expect?
So I was going to say her written dissent was longer than the court's. I think it was Gorsuch that wrote the court's view, and then also Kagan wrote the companion. So hers was longer than both of theirs. And I always say some people have something to say, and some people just have to say something.
Hers was an unsavory pretzel. I'll just put it that way. A pretzel of too many words that meant nothing. Well, I see Autumn has popped on my screen here, which means we have some questions from the audience, and so I will turn it over to Autumn. I know you've got plenty, but we've got a few minutes, so go ahead, Autumn.
Yes, I will keep it brief. The first one I wanted to start off with, Laura asked a question for you, Forrest. Looking back, is there anything that a doctor or an adult could have said to you to inspire you to look more deeper into the medical decisions that you were about to make?
Yeah, of course. I couldn't pull a single thing out of my hat. But I do know that there were multiple times when it's actually on the record that towards the end that I was asking for a more critical therapist. So I think I really was seeking out some better therapy and care at the same time. I was driven to do it and I was on the wait list. That's the other thing. Part of how this works is once they get your name on the wait list, it's like you're on a conveyor belt. And I know I'm not the only patient there's a kind of dynamic that can happen when a trans-identified patient, some part of them really does believe that, they can become the opposite sex. A lot of times they go, we don't really believe that, but then by their actions they show that on some level they do believe that and they want to become the opposite sex, or they believe that the treatments might help them. Some part of them believes that, and another part doesn't believe it. So you got these two parts of yourself that are in conflict.
Mhm.
And then when you go to meet with the surgeons, um, you naturally hide the part that is doubting it because you don't want them to see that and then call the surgery off. You want it to be on the plate, and surgeons are very, right, they're going to meet with you for 15 minutes and then they're on to the next person. They're very busy people.
Mhm.
So I really needed a therapist who was willing to take the time to dig and ask those questions, but that was really hard to find.
Hmm.
I never found that until after after the fact, right? And I think that that's we've been talking about the Colorado ruling, and that's really important because a lot of therapists are scared and a lot of
Mhm.
doctors are scared.
On that same line of just having that support, we had another question asking if your trans friendly friends have abandoned you since your detransition, or if there was anyone who truly tried in that community who truly tried to understand you and support you during your detransition.
Uh, I'm not missing any of the friends from my trans days. I cut those people out. So part of my detransition was that I got sick and lost my housing and ended back up with my parents. So there was a very clean break between me and my former community. It was a radical community in a lot of ways. I was already distancing myself from stuff going on in that community. I did have a few friends that continued to reach out to me. But definitely the irony is that of all the friends that I had during those years, and acquaintances that I met, it was the trans identified ones and the ones that were part of the queer community were the ones that just kind of completely, you know, disappeared. Which again, I don't mind
Hmm.
because they weren't right themselves.
Mhm. Another question that we got from Olga for all three of you, if you can just share your favorite resources, anything that's helpful in understanding this conversation better, whether it's someone who's considering transitioning or somebody who's potentially looking to detransition.
Uh, what what first reached me was the gender wider lens episode 4, I think. It was one of the first episodes of Gender Wider Lens with Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad, um and they've both moved on. Stella's a great resource. Anything that she does, she knows a lot about this. She's worked with a lot of detransitioners. Um, there's now a support group and a project called Beyond Trans. And I've been to a couple of those meetings. So I'm a big fan of Gen Spect. I think they're doing a lot of really good work.
Jennifer or Dr. Welch, do you guys have anything to add in addition to those?
I'll just put a plug in for the 3 documentary films I made, which are all free on YouTube. So I'm not making money off of this appeal. My first film was Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? And you'll see a bunch of physicians in that film, Quentin Van Meter, Andre Van Mol, Paul Ruse up at WashU. The second one's the Transition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters. It's 3 young women who fell down this rabbit hole. And then the last film is called The Lost Boys, Searching for Manhood, which is all on 5 male detransitioners. So I think they're compelling firsthand accounts. And a lot of times you can get people to watch movies when you can't get them to read books or, listen to long form things.
And speaking of books, I would say the Bible is a good reading that book of Isaiah. Let not the eunuch say, I am a dry tree, for so long as he upholds my laws and my Sabbath. I will give him a place at the table and an everlasting name better than sons and daughters that shall not be cut off. This is not actually new to Western civilization. I'm a little, I took myself out of the scene for a long time and did a lot of reading and in history and Western literature, and that has been hugely enriching to me.
Amen.
Amazing.
Just briefly on that question, I look forward to Forrest book when he
Yeah.
finishes that, hopefully.
It has a title.
He
It's
will.
called
Yep.
To Be Seen.
So I look forward to reading that. Just a couple of brief notes, so just keep this short because the list is long. But to learn about the ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, you can look to Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, transgender craze. And then for physicians or researchers, anyone kind of scientific, you can go to SEGM.org. That's SEGM, Society for Ethical Gender Medicine. They've categorized like all kinds of journal articles and studies and all kinds of, and they've categorized it. So it's a good resource to look for anything like gender critical. But they'll post anything there related to trans, not just like any one kind of, you can find anything there, but they'll post everything there. That is the point. It won't be selected out for just pro-trans literature.
Well, thank you for all of those
Also,
resources.
again,
Go
sorry,
ahead. No, go
our
ahead. Go
own
ahead.
website, Resilience Health Network. And so I think we post that, was it resiliencehealth.network? It's what all three of us are involved in. You'll find us on the website. I'm one of the core clinicians. Jennifer Lahl is director of operation. I don't know what your official, Forrest is our ambassador, a detransitioner ambassador. So please, if you are interested in helping people like Forrest, please join our network. We are running a survey of detransitioners. We have webinars, we can offer CME, and we can offer support. If you want to help, please find us there.
Thank you for all those resources. Dr. Cole, I'll pass it back to you before we go to our closing announcements.
Okie dokie. Well, first I want to thank Forrest for your courage, for your authenticity, for just, being able to share your heart and soul and, some difficult things with, such a wide audience. And I commend your courage and I commend you on, your journey. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Welch and Jennifer, for sharing your breadth of experience and knowledge. And, here at IMA, we're all in this together because there's an individual patient with individual needs, and there's informed consent, and there's pillars of medicine that have been ignored for so long. So any closing thoughts? We'll go Dr. Welch, Jennifer, and then Forrest, I'll let you close out.
I think I said my closing part there, so we'll just move on.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I've said my piece.
Thank you. Forrest, any final comments?
I'll just refer back to the Resilience Health Network. That's how I found Dr. Katherine when I moved. I moved from Oregon out to the Midwest a couple years ago for family, and I needed to find an endocrinologist who could write my prescription for testosterone, and so I was connected through the Resilience Health Network. So I wrote for it. I hope that there's a bright future and a wide horizon for the Resilience Health Network and for restorative care, and we need as much help as we can get.
We all hope that same thing. And again, thank you for everything and joining us tonight. I think this was very enlightening, and just, you're a handsome, kind, well-spoken young man, and we're just grateful that you would join us and share your story. And on that, we will close out and pass it over to Autumn for final announcements. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, I'll be quick just with a few organizational announcements. We are almost 2 weeks out from our annual IMA. This is our 5th annual medical education conference, Emerging Trends in Medicine. This 2-day event exploring the latest innovations, research, and forward-thinking practices shaping the future of healthcare. The full conference agenda is approved for continuing medical education credits, and attendees can earn 12.75 CME credits. We would love to see you there, and you can get your tickets today at imahealth.org/conference. Right now, every dollar you give will be doubled up to $250,000, but we are only about 30% to our target right now. IMA is working on the Parents First Project. This is a free, searchable childhood health resource center created by independent pediatric experts to give families clear, evidence-based guidance that they can trust. In this time of chaos with ACIP, CDC, HHS, and pediatric medical associations, parents and pediatricians deserve a trusted source. So please help us build resources that are so needed. You can donate today at imahealth.org/parents. Written by Dr. Paul Merrick, IMA's Chief Scientific Officer, the updated approach to repurpose drugs for patients with cancer is now a part of a broader set of new cancer resources, alongside the new metabolic trap and cancer resistance drug cycling guides. Together, these resources help readers explore how these ideas connect with a broader cancer care framework. You can download them today at imahealth.org/cancer resource hub. In her latest piece, Jenna McCarthy takes a sharp, funny, and all too relatable look at the pressure to do everything right in the modern wellness culture. From kale smoothies and cold plunges to supplements, sleep tracking, and an endless optimization, the pursuit of health can start to feel less like self-care and more like a full-time job. If you'd like to read this full article, you can scan the QR code on screen, or search the link on screen, which is geni.us/addicted to wellness. All right. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us tonight. And whether you're watching live or catching the replay, thank you for being here. Before we close, we wanted to share a clip of IMA Senior Fellow Dr. Molly Rutherford on why the COVID justice resolution matters. During COVID lockdowns, Dr. Rutherford saw the damage up close: rising anxiety, worsening addiction, and vulnerable children trapped at home with their abusers, cut off from the usual systems of protection and care. If you'd like to take action, please sign the COVID Justice Resolution at covidjustice.org. Thank you all again for being here, and let's take a look.
I'm Dr. Molly Rutherford. I'm Senior Fellow in Family Medicine and Addiction Medicine with the Independent Medical Alliance, and I support the COVID Justice Resolution. I started to see the negative consequences of the pandemic lockdowns and school closures very early. In March of 2020, I had a patient whose son unfortunately died of an overdose. He was scheduled to go to court for a minor offense, and his court date was canceled. And unfortunately, he used and he died of what was likely a fentanyl overdose. He probably would have been sent to rehab by the judge as a first-time offender if he was able to make his court date. And then I had several other patients who relapsed throughout that year and the following year, mainly because of the increased anxiety, but also their in-person recovery meetings were canceled or they went to online. Several of my patients also started drinking more heavily, or patients that really didn't drink much at all started drinking because they were stuck at home, working from home, and it was just a stressful time, and many people turned to alcohol to get through the stress. I think the media really exaggerated the impact that the virus would have, and many of us very early on, I didn't know what to think. I guess I thought I would see people just dropping dead, and then it was clear pretty quickly that wasn't going to happen. But I think just so many people were diagnosed with anxiety disorders that didn't have them, including kids, which was really, really tragic. We were seeing kids who were stuck online all day, supposedly doing school, actually not doing school, but spending time on social media and developing eating disorders. Many kids just never showed up to their online school. The disadvantaged kids were the ones who suffered the most because they didn't have parents who could invest in alternative schooling, or they didn't have parents that were at home, making sure that they did their lessons. In Kentucky, we also saw our surveillance measures, which were typically school nurses and school counselors who detected potential child abuse, were not available because the schools were closed. And unfortunately, in our state, we're one of the highest for child abuse. And these kids were just left at home with their abusers. It's sad to think that it went on as long as it did. We were pretty fortunate in our state just to get it corrected pretty early. Our kids went back to school in the fall of 2021, but on a alternate day schedule. And I know many states were worse, but I still think overall it's very tragic, the harm that we did for a virus that 99 had a 99% survival rate and even higher among children. Because of all this harm, it is important that we make sure that we right the wrongs that we can and never let this happen again. So I call on everyone to sign the resolution at covidjustice.org and join those of us who are trying to prevent this harm from ever happening again.